The case of the vanished jewels. It was a gloomy evening when Detective Eliza Finch received a call that would change the course of her career. The city's wealthiest woman, Mrs. Clara Davenport, had reported her entire collection of rare jewels missing from her mansion. The jewels, worth millions, were supposed to be locked in a secure vault in her bedroom. But somehow, they had vanished without a trace. When Eliza arrived at the mansion, she was greeted by a distraught Mrs. Davenport and a handful of bewildered staff members. Mrs. Davenport explained that she'd been hosting a small gathering with close friends just the night before. She had shown the jewels to her guests and then returned them to the vault before retiring for the night. By morning, they were gone. Eliza began by interviewing each of the guests, all prominent members of society, as well as the household staff. But there were no signs of forced entry, and all alibis appeared solid. It was a perfect mystery, one that would require an expert's eye to solve. Then Eliza noticed something peculiar. The butler, a quiet, elderly man named Mr. Green, had served Mrs. Davenport for decades. Yet he seemed unusually nervous that day, his hands trembling as he recounted his routine. Eliza pressed him on it, but he insisted he had no knowledge of the missing jewels. After a thorough inspection of the vault, Eliza spotted a tiny, almost invisible detail, a faint fingerprint smudge on the inside of the vault's door. Curious, she took a closer look and realized it was too fresh to be Mrs. Davenport's own fingerprint. It had to be someone who was close enough to know the vault's combination. Eliza confronted Mr. Green, who at first denied everything. But when she revealed her discovery of the fingerprint, his expression shifted. His hands started to shake again, and he finally broke down. Yes, he confessed. I took the jewels. But not for the reasons you think. Mr. Green revealed that Mrs. Davenport's nephew, a gambler deep in debt, had threatened to harm his aunt if he didn't get the money he needed. The butler had stolen the jewels with the intention of selling them quietly to protect his employer from her nephew's schemes. Just as Eliza thought she had pieced it all together, Mrs. Davenport entered the room, overhearing the confession. A cold smile spread across her face as she said, "I know." Shocked, Eliza asked Mrs. Davenport what she meant. "You see," Mrs. Davenport said calmly, "I knew my nephew was trouble, but I needed someone loyal enough to protect me. I staged this entire situation to see if Mr. Green would truly be willing to go to such lengths. And he passed." Eliza stared in disbelief. Mrs. Davenport hadn't lost her jewels at all. She had orchestrated the whole scenario as a loyalty test for her faithful butler. As Eliza left the mansion, she couldn't help but shake her head, marveling at the twisted loyalty of the rich and powerful.